Homeworld was the first game ever to be released by now acclaimed strategy developer Relic Entertainment. It hit shelves in 1999, and after months and months of hype, it was an instant hit, spawning a beloved series that is still going strong to this day. Though it did take a short nap for, a decade or so between Homeworld 2 and the remastered collection. Small details. With Homeworld 3 being just around the corner, you may be looking to replay the classics before it releases. Or perhaps you've never played them to begin with and want to get up to speed for this new entry. Either way, I'm here to help by answering one simple question. Should you play Homeworld in 2023? Now, rather than talk about it at the end like I normally would, I'm going to go over Homeworld's modern considerations now because it just makes so much more sense to do it that way. And that's all because of the Homeworld Remastered Collection. It includes the original versions of Homeworlds 1 and 2, as well as their respective modern remakes. And this product is the only way to buy any of these games today, except for Emergence, which we will talk about another time. So you'd think this would be obvious, but unfortunately it's not. Do you play the remaster or the original? The choice between the two isn't as cut and dry as you might think, and it's the reason that the script ballooned by an extra 1,000 words. For Homeworld 2, the answer is easy, but we'll save that for later anyway. Unfortunately, the original isn't quite so simple. The issue stems from the fact that the original versions of Homeworld 1 and 2 were made using different engines, but the remasters are made on the same updated version of Homeworld 2's engine, meaning Homeworld 1 had to be completely rebuilt, a process that altered its core significantly and made it less of a remake and more of a fork of Homeworld 2 with Homeworld 1's levels. Now, this obviously came with some benefits, the primary ones being that all the factions from both games can be played with or against one another in multiplayer, and the graphical, gameplay and UI overhaul, plus the uniformity between the two games. But despite their similar visual styles and not too distant release times, classic Homeworld 1 and 2 are different beasts under the hood, and there are some significant issues with Homeworld 1's remaster that persist even to this day, after nearly a dozen of official fixes from Gearbox. At launch, the problems were vast, the technical state being the most critical. From desktop crashes to bugs that made completing missions impossible, to script and AI issues, seemingly nothing was spared. Even excluding those, there were other complaints levelled at the remaster, such as the removal of fuel for fighters, the importing of Homeworld 2's stances, buggy, inconsistent formations, the significant alteration of core Homeworld 1 features, like salvage corvettes, the removal of the Tidan as a playable faction in the campaign, and more. I mean, just look at all the fixes and updates Gearbox provided over its many patches. And this list of changes between the two versions on the wiki. These should give you an idea of how many potential problems and complaints there were on launch. And still there were issues that Gearbox never fixed, even after all these patches. A lot of which were picked up by the simply named 2.3 Players patch, a community update that fixed bugs, patched exploits, and made general improvements and balance changes to gameplay, UI elements, and graphics. And perhaps most importantly, added a difficulty slider. This is notable because in Homeworld your fleet follows you between campaign missions, and by default, Homeworld 1 Remastered includes Homeworld 2's difficulty scaling mechanics, meaning the game difficulty will dynamically change, depending on how strong your fleet is at the beginning of each mission, and there's no way to change the difficulty outside of that. The concept is sound, but here it was tuned to the point where some missions could be literally impossible to complete. The patch aims to fix this by allowing you to reduce difficulty down to original Homeworld 1 levels, and beyond if you like. And you can also go the other way, I guess, if you're into Suffer Core. But even with all that said, there are still issues with the game that will never and won't ever be fixed. Formations are nothing like the original game, and some missions remain punishingly difficult if you've made the wrong decision in the previous one, despite the fix to the scaler. Blackbird did address this problem in Deserts of Karak by adding a default fleet option for every mission if you'd screwed yourself, and man, I sorely missed that here. I really do hope that it's included in Homeworld 3, I'm pretty sure it will be. So then, what version do you play? Well, if you can handle the aged UI and visuals, I honestly think most of you would be best sticking with the original. It holds up despite its age, and it feels like you're playing something truly special and authentic. Knowing this was made in 1999 just beggars belief. But if you do want the visual uplift over anything, which I understand because it is gorgeous, then play the remaster. But just be sure to download the player's patch. I'll be using footage from both versions throughout this video to illustrate the changes and provide more variety to you guys, though to be honest it will probably be mostly remastered footage as it just looks so good. I hope the comparison and discussion to come will also help lead you to your own conclusions. Okay, can we talk about the game now? Homeworld is undoubtedly one of the most iconic RTSs ever made thanks to its striking visuals and incredible soundtrack. The latter is still referenced to this day, and to say that people are stoked to see Paul Ruskay return to do the music for Homeworld 3 is an understatement. The soundtrack is being used throughout this video, and even if you've never played the game before, I'm certain the quality of it isn't lost on you. Its use in certain pivotal moments in the story is impeccable, and if you know, you know. Thankfully, this incredible OST was revamped for the remaster, and it sounds just as good as you expect. The visual uplift is a lot more in your face than the music, mostly because of just how much of an uplift it is. This is positively gorgeous. Despite the remaster itself getting a bit old in the tooth nowadays, with it being nearly a decade old, honestly I wouldn't scoff at seeing this in a new game released today. A lot of it is down to the art direction of the original Homeworld, with its iconic ship designs and skyboxes, and despite the jaggies, it's actually this that helps to keep the original so good to look at. No matter which version you're playing, the audio-visual experience is truly wonderful. Homeworld was ahead of its time in 1999, and its gameplay concepts hold up really darn well. There's just a single resource to gather here, IUs, which are needed for everything from construction to research to hyperspace jumps. The mothership acts as a central hub, but it can't shoot or move outside of a hyperspace jump, so an army of smaller ships are needed to keep things running. Resource controllers are mobile drop-offs for your collectors, carriers can build and transport smaller vessels across the vastness of space, and a sizable array of other ships fill niche roles in your roster, mostly combat related. Homeworld is very much a game about specialities. There is a ship for everything. Want to destroy enemy fighters? Alright, here's some options. How about sinking destroyers or cruisers? Okay, all of these will do it, just take your pick. Or maybe you have a more unique task. Rest assured, there's a ship for that. Furthermore, the tactic and control mechanics ensure that you can operate your fleet effectively when it grows in size and complexity. Formations allow groups of fighters or corvettes to perform in unique ways, and stances allow even more flexibility. Homeworld can be punishing in its rigidity, but that's what makes it so rewarding. While in other RTSs you may be able to eke out a win simply by mass producing one or two single unit types, you'll struggle to do that here. Of course there are some units that can be mass produced as jack-of-all-trades vessels, but you really need to focus in on dedicated ships to effectively deal with the enemy threat. I mean, look at the swarm of fighters against a capital ship. Sure, it looks cool, but to actually destroy it with these guys will take basically an eternity. And I mean, that's what all these specialty ships are for, but of course they have weaknesses too. So if you want to build, say, 100 bombers to take out an enemy destroyer, and you come up against hostile interceptors, they're not going to last very long. So in turn, you need your own fighters and anti-fighter craft to protect the bombers. But then they'll be countered by enemy corvettes, and you need frigates to destroy the corvettes, and they'll bring destroyers to destroy your frigates, and it goes round and round and round. It's because of this that deploying the right ship in the right situation is hugely satisfying. And not only do you have ships with different combat abilities, the game makes a point of giving you ones with distinctive abilities that don't perform well in combat, but do perform unique and specific tasks. The salvage corvette, for example, can capture enemy ships, and you can use multiple to capture larger vessels, though they can't fight and they are very fragile, so protection is essential. There are also ships like mine layers, dedicated probes for scouting, and the expected repair craft, carriers, and resource collection ships. Most of the fundamentals established in the original game are unchanged for the remaster. But that's not to say that everything's the same, and there are some auxiliary systems as well as other niche mechanics that were mistranslated when the game moved to its new engine. For example, those salvage corvettes aren't actually in Homeworld 2, so they had to be specifically added in from the original, and they're not exactly intact. For example, the amount of them that you can field has been reduced to 14 from simply being tied to the corvette class cap, and they're also unable to capture fighters in other corvettes, where they were able to do so in the original. And the number required to capture larger ships was increased. Plus, they were just far more effective overall before, thanks to their reduced cost, improved health, and increased population cap. But I mean, for the most part, if you haven't played the original for quite a while, then simply dropping into the remaster probably won't seem like that much of a change. It's not until you get into the campaign that things become a little more obvious. And that primarily comes down to the mission and encounter design, a lot of which hasn't made such an elegant transition to this new engine. Okay, mega spoilers here for most of Homeworld 1 to follow. Skip this section if you don't want to know what happens. And if that's you, just stop watching and go play the damn game already. Right, so the first mission starts off with basic controls and such, and I'd recommend getting familiar with these before or during this mission, as Homeworld is one of the more, how do I put this, complex RTSs to handle, due to the requirement to control not only 2, but 3 dimensions. Plus all the formations and other ship management options that are available. It is significantly easier in the remaster, thanks to vast UI and interface improvements, and this is second only to the visuals, as being the main reason to play the remaster over the original. Once you've got the hang of it, everything is a go. After some quiet exploration in your first combat encounter, you return to Karak to make a horrifying discovery, its delivery becoming one of the most iconic moments in RTS history.
No one's left. Everything's gone. Karak is burning.
Karak is being consumed by a firestorm. The scaffold has been destroyed. All orbital facilities destroyed. Significant debris ring in low Karak orbit. Receiving no communications from anywhere in the system. Not even beacons.
The reveal is incredibly effective, and I love how the campaign takes a bit of time to drop this on you, rather than opening the game with it before getting any context to your situation. I've always thought this is a more effective way of doing things. Like in the opening of Mass Effect 2, I think having a mission or two before the Normandy's demise would be much more effective than how it is now in the game, where you just open up and the ship gets destroyed. I think having a mission or two before the Normandy's demise would be more effective than the game just opening with such a significant event. The first incident is indicative on how the rest of the story unfolds. There's no fluff, the lore is simple but it's efficient. It gives you enough time to become invested, but it doesn't overstay its welcome or needlessly complicate the situation, which is something I hugely appreciate. It really does just let the gameplay speak for itself.
Attack plan complete.
Resource collector under attack.
Enemy vessels retreating to this point.
Mission design evolves throughout the campaign in a few ways. The first is thanks to the technological advancement allowed to you through research, and some trading with another alien race that been tussy. But before that, you will encounter your first problem with Homeworld's campaign in the remaster, and that appears as soon as you return to Karak. The issue stems from these little ships, the cryopods. You see, these hold the last remaining survivors of Karak on them, so you need to wipe the enemy vessels out and get those pods into the mothership so you can, preserve whatever's left of your species or whatever. But because of the scaling that was introduced in the remaster, having too many ships at the start of this mission means that more enemies than in the original will now spawn to destroy the cryopods. And if you lose them, it's game over. And since you've likely got a few ships at your disposal from the fairly carefree mission beforehand, the likelihood that you'll straight up lose this mission over and over again is very high. You can tell that just by googling and seeing how many responses there are. It's also not super obvious that you actually need to use the salvage corvettes to get those cryopods out of there, especially if you're a new player, So you could potentially find yourself trying over and over again to achieve an impossible outcome until you realize that. But even then it's not easy, and it may just be simpler to replay the previous mission and scuttle a portion of your fleet before beginning this one. Annoying. This difficulty scaling persists as the primary issue throughout the remastered campaign, and that's why installing the player patch is non-negotiable. Without it, you're punished for having too many ships at the beginning of a mission, and there's no way to restart it with a default fleet like Deserts of Karak. So if you screw it up and get stonewalled, you'll potentially have to replay earlier missions to purposefully end them with a smaller active fleet, so you aren't scaled out of the game by the AI. Another problem mission is Tannhauser Gate, Mission 11. Here you're required to save your ally's ship who's under attack, but they're immediately under fire on mission start, and depending on your fleet size, there's a good chance that you're just totally outgunned here. Even with the player's patch, this can be tough, bordering on impossible. You're told to draw the Titan away, but often the AI simply refuses to stop attacking, and because their heavy cruisers are such tanks, it's a slog to lay down the DPS required to win. I finally managed to pull it off after 5 or so tries, but I honestly just felt like I got lucky, and mentally I was prepared to have this take much longer. These two missions are the ones I personally had the most trouble with, but I'm sure there's people out there who have had issues with others too. Unfortunately, it's just the way it is. For the most part though, it was smooth sailing, and I had an enjoyable time for the majority of the campaign outside of those couple of missions. And there are some pretty cool missions in there too. I liked how Relic tried to make some of the maps more interesting than just an empty void of space with a different skybox. Like in this one where they used pathways that protected your ship from damage in a radioactive environment. The Garden of Kadesh was also a great concept, and the missions that are set in and around this locale are probably the best ones in the game, thanks to the unique enemy and story revelations that come with it. Now, I have deliberately obfuscated some of the finer details with the story in this video because A, if you already know, then you don't need me to tell you everything again, and B, if you don't know, I want you to experience it for yourself. You shouldn't even be watching this video. Go on, shoo. I was taken aback with just how good Homeworld's campaign is. The gameplay is about as I expected, but the story really clicked with me, as it clearly has for countless people over the past 25 years. There's something about its simplicity that leads it to be incredibly compelling, but there's still enough meat on the bone to leave you thinking and wanting more once the credits roll. Thankfully, that aspect of the game is identical no matter which version you play, so no one is excluded from its greatness. It's everything else that is different: graphics, gameplay, UI, sound design, mechanics. Overall, I do think the campaign is easier in the classic version, and there's a bit less faff too. It's about as straightforward as you can get. Yes, the UI is not nearly as intuitive, and there are a few ancient gameplay mechanics, like not being able to quick dock your ships at the end of a mission, plus the graphics are old school, but you can play it as the developer intended, and that's got to stand for something. Plus there's the fact that you can do a race swap and play as the Titan, which is pretty cool. And look, it's not a cakewalk by any means, and a lot of the missions are still hard, so be ready for a challenge all the same. But you can expect it to be fair. Hard, but fair. And it's a lot easier to cheese if you know what to do. That's contrasting to the remaster, where it often feels hard and unfair. Sometimes completing a mission is literally impossible without replaying the previous one or installing the player patch, and that's just annoying. Everything about the two versions of Homeworld really is just give or take. You gain things in one aspect, but lose them in others. It's a shame that there's no single, definitive way to play Homeworld today, but ultimately we just have to work with what we've got. So it's up to you to decide which version of Homeworld that you want to experience, based on each version's merits and what ones mean the most to you. Homeworld has always been a great game to skirmish in with your mates, but unlike the two versions of the campaign, the remastered collection only includes one version of multiplayer. The classic version does have offline skirmish, but if you want to play skirmish multiplayer, then you need to own an original copy of the game and have a LAN connection to do it, real or otherwise. But what we do have is interesting though, because the contents of Homeworld 1 and 2 have been merged here into one single mode. So you can now play any faction from either game against or alongside one another. Pretty cool. But is it fun? Yeah, of course it is. It's Homeworld. Mixing and matching the factions is a unique concept, and the differences between them are novel, like how sequel races use fighter squadrons, while the originals failed individual craft. As expected, the gameplay holds up fantastically, and there's a lot of fun to be had here. What really takes it to the next level though are the mods, and I'm going to bait you and we'll discuss those in the next video when we cover Homeworld 2, since that game is the basis of Homeworld Remastered, and the sequel was really where the modding scene started to take off. Please do me a favour and drop your favourites below so I can make sure to try them out before making that video. Of course you should play Homeworld in 2023. I hope that if you didn't know that already, this video has made it abundantly clear. But every game is different and each have their idiosyncrasies. Homeworld's clearly is its remaster, and you'll get a swath of opinions on what version you should play depending on who you ask, so here's mine. For the campaign, I can honestly recommend both versions for different reasons. It just depends on what you're looking for. Because the same goes for the opposite. I can recommend against both versions for different reasons too. I guess the easiest way that I can put it is that if you don't mind the graphics, and some of you may even prefer them thanks to their nostalgic charm, then Classic is probably the way to go. But if you can't handle the graphics, which I totally understand, then the remaster isn't nearly as bad as it was when it came out, but it does still have its issues. Though the UI improvements are massive, it does look great, and with the player's patch, the key pain points are mostly sort of solved, and obviously for the multiplayer, the remastered is the only way to go since you can't do that in Classic. So make up your own mind and let me know in the comments which version you recommend. It's a shame that this original game didn't get the remaster it deserved. The technical requirements levelled at it fundamentally changed what it was, and we'll probably never get another chance to see it reimagined in the future. Though, thankfully from what I've heard, Homeworld 2 had a much cleaner transition, and I'm looking forward to diving into that very, very soon. But first, thanks very much for watching. As always, huge shout out to my patrons and YouTube members for supporting me and what I do here. You can join for as little as $1 a month, which comes with access to the Discord where we play and talk about all kinds of games, but mostly RTS, of course. Huge thanks to Aero, Brizzy218, George Brain, Jack Walsh, Nutty Jawa of Lord Jeebus, T Edits, Crispy Robo Chicken, XB204, Benjamin Howard, David, Takayo, Second David, David Taboli, Nintendo, Bad Ghosts, Sean Weber, Grey Spirit 4, and of course me Paladins, Johnny Woof, Strateger, and Eric. Much appreciated, guys. If you could have worked on a classic RTS title, or any RTS title to any capacity, what would it have been, and what kind of role do you think you would have loved to be a part of? Well, I use a camera in my normal job, so I think I'd have to say being like an FMV video operator in like the old Command & Conquer games would be a pretty sick gig. Otherwise, being in some sort of marketing role in any kind of game really, I guess I'd say my favourite, maybe Impossible Creatures, where I could, make videos about the game, talk to developers, and kind of support the marketing efforts of said game would be really, really cool. How sad are you going to be when Homeworld 3 doesn't do well? Oof. How many, if any, of the collector's editions are you going to buy? And how old were you when you watched Karak burn? We'll see about Homeworld 3. I reckon it's going to do well, and I think it's going to be good. Deserts of Karak was good enough to where I think Blackbird know how to make a good RTS game. They've got experience with Homeworld, they've taken their time, so I would be surprised if Homeworld 3 was a flop. I don't think I'll buy any collector's editions. I'm not really into that. I try and not just accumulate stuff, and I assume I'll get a review code anyway. I hope so. But I would like to try and give away maybe a couple of digital collector's editions if the game's good. So look out for that, I guess. If there's a giveaway, I'll make sure you all hear about it. How old were you when you watched Karak burn? 27.